Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video in a new series on building Spring Boot based Java applications on serverless technologies on AWS. In the first video in this series, we're going to look at just how easy it is to get started running your Spring APIs on Lambda. And to do that, we're going to take a simple CRUD-based Spring API and get that running on Lambda in less than 10 minutes. Let's get straight into it. So first, let's have a look at what the API is actually doing that we've got. So we've got this simple product API that allows us to create, get, and list products. So we've got a few endpoints on our API. We've got an endpoint to create products, to list all of the products, and then to get a specific product. There's nothing particularly complicated happening under the hood here. We're building using the built-in Spring repository functionality to connect to a Postgres database. I've already created the Postgres database on AWS. That's sat there waiting to be connected to. And then we've just got this simple product model that has an ID and a name and a price. This is just a simple example to show you how easy it is to get started. So AWS have actually built some handy packages to help us really quickly get these applications running on Lambda. And the first is this AWS Serverless Java container package. I'll put the link for the GitHub repo in the video description below. And there's a couple of things we need to add to get started. So the first is the dependency to the actual package itself. So I'm going to take a copy of this XML from the GitHub page. I'm going to go back to my project and to my pom.xml, and I'm going to just paste that dependency in there. And I'm just going to ask Maven to refresh just to make sure I've got that package downloaded. Step one. The second and final step is that we just need to add a new class to our project. So I'm going to create a new class here, and I'm going to call it Lambda Stream Handler. And then, quite usefully, on the GitHub repository, we have an example implementation of exactly what this class needs to contain. So I'm going to grab a copy of that. I'm going to paste that in there, and then I just need to quickly run through and add all of these import statements. Let's just go through and add all of these quickly. We'll import that, we'll import the exception, and then we'll just import some of these streams at the bottom here, and then finally this IO exception. The only thing we now need to configure in this class is our actual Spring application. So my Spring application is called Product API application, and if I just go and have a look here, you can see I've got the Product API application just there. Okay, and that is actually all we need to do to be able to run this application on Lambda. This is everything. This is ready to go. We've not changed a single line of existing code. All we've done is add some additional packages and an additional entry point for Lambda. What this Stream Lambda Handler class actually does is it takes the event payload that comes in from Lambda, that might be an API gateway for example, and it translates that to a format that Spring Boot understands and then uses that to invoke your API. And then when your Spring API responds with something, it then actually returns that response back to API Gateway in a format that API Gateway understands. So you can think of this like a little proxy layer that does that conversion between API Gateway and Spring. When you run anything on Lambda, you give Lambda a handler, and that handler is normally just a method name. So you see we've got this handle request method at the bottom here. That is what Lambda is actually going to invoke whenever it receives an event payload. Okay, so now that we've actually got this code written, how are we actually now going to get this running on Lambda? Well, to do that, we're going to use the AWS Serverless Application Model, or SAM. And SAM provides some handy extensions on top of CloudFormation, as well as some a CLI, so you can build and package and deploy your serverless applications from within a terminal window. And to do that, we just define a template file. So for anyone who's familiar with CloudFormation, you'll find this format quite familiar because it is just some extensions on top of CloudFormation. The important things when we're configuring Lambda functions are this code URI property, and it's this code URI property that SAM will use as the root folder to use when actually compiling our application. I've created this template file in the same folder as my Java application, so that code URI is just a dot. And then, as I was just talking about with the way Lambda invokes work, Lambda just tries to call a method. And you see here I'm specifying my stream Lambda Handler class and the handle request method on that class. The final important thing is here is this events section down at the bottom here. It's the events section where we configure what is actually going to invoke our Lambda function. In this case, we're specifying a API, and on that API we want a proxy path. What the proxy path will do is just pass all requests that hit that path onto our Lambda function. Because we've specified an event of type API, SAM will automatically create an API gateway API for us. We don't need to configure that. That is abstracted away behind. And then of course we're just saying any method. We just want all methods. We want SpringBoot to do all of that routing. The other interesting thing in here is the configuration of our network. Because we're connecting to a Postgres database, Lambda needs to be able to access that database. I will come back to that in a later video. So what I'm actually going to do to deploy this now is quickly flick over to my terminal. And as I said earlier, SAM provides, as well as the CloudFormation helpers, also a command line interface to be able to build and deploy your applications. So the first command I'm going to run is a SAM build command, and that command, I've run that from the same directory as where this template file is stored. What SAM will actually do now is look for each resource in my template file that is of type AWS Serverless Function, and it will in essence do a for each over each of these functions and run the compilation of my Java app based on the code URI specified. So if I had 10 serverless functions defined in this template, SAM would then run 10 separate compilations. You can see that runs really quickly. That has just compiled my application, and what it has actually done is created this folder on my file system called .aws SAM. And if I go and have a look inside this folder now, you can actually see the compiled Java application that's ready now to be packaged up and uploaded to S3 for Lambda to invoke. So the next command that I'm going to run is actually the SAM deploy command, and this is what will actually allow us to deploy this application to AWS. And I'm going to pass in the guided flag, and this will give me a step-by-step walkthrough that allows me to control how this app gets deployed. So I want to call my CloudFormation stack Java Spring app. I'm going to deploy this to US East 1. I don't need to confirm every change before it deploys. I'm okay with SAM and the CloudFormation creating IAM roles. I don't want to enable rollbacks. SAM will actually look at my template, and if I've defined an API resource without authorization, SAM will warn me and ask me if that's okay. Yes, it is. And then SAM will just save some of these configuration details to a configuration file that gets called samconfig.toml. If I now hit enter there, the first thing SAM's going to do is upload that zip file of my application code to S3. And you can see that happening there. It just packages up all them jar files and sends them up to an S3 bucket that has been created by SAM. And then it's going to trigger the CloudFormation creation, because under the hood, this is just using CloudFormation. It's just generated a CloudFormation template. And I'll actually get real-time updates now back to my terminal as CloudFormation is doing things. So you can see now it's created a change set, and I can see that the CloudFormation is going to create some permissions. It's going to create a Lambda function. It's going to create API gateway and a REST API. And then I'll actually get these real-time updates at the bottom that will show me exactly what is happening in CloudFormation. Currently, that's just creating my IAM roles. You can see the IAM role is completed and it's now moved on to creating my Lambda function. I'm just going to pause the video here. This can take a couple of minutes and then we will get right back to it. So that has completed deploying now. So what I can do is if I now flip over to the AWS console and go to the API Gateways console, you'll see I now have my Java Spring App API, as well as some .NET, because I couldn't go through a Java video without throwing a little bit of .NET in there, of course. So if I open up my Java Spring App API now, I can then grab the API endpoint of my API. So if I go to the stages section and to my production stage, I can actually get my API endpoint there. I'm going to grab a copy of that and I'm going to flick over to Postman and let's actually create a product on our API. So I'm going to make a call to my products endpoint and I'm going to add a body to my API request. This is my first product with a price of, let's say, £5. And then I'm going to make that post request and let's get my API endpoint right. And you see there, I've got my API request back from Lambda. If I make a few more requests, you can see my ID is auto incrementing. If I now switch that to a GET request, for example, I will get back my complete list of products. I can't make the GET request with a body, of course. There we are, I've got my list of products from my database, albeit a very boring product catalog. And that's as easy as it is to get started with Spring on Lambda using the AWS Serverless Application Model. And remember, we've not changed a single line of our existing application code. We've added a new dependency, we've added a class for Lambda to use and invoke, and that is it. It will run on Lambda, hopefully. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, please subscribe. We're going to continue this Java series and look at some of the things you need to consider when you're running Java applications on serverless technologies. I will see you next time.